All right. So we'd like to welcome everybody. I will paste one more time. Well, I'll do it later as well, but just for starting, over here in the chat, the links to the documents. We have two documents or two links for you today. One is our normal call doc. Please sign in the document. A section to help us keep notes, as well as a section down at the bottom to suggest a future call topic. The second link is tied to how we're doing today's presentation. We're going to use Mentimeter to help us kind of do an interactive presentation. So we'd strongly encourage you all to consider, a mobile device or just another, web browser tab, something to log into that link there. You can also just look at the top of the screen we're sharing and it shows the menti.com and then the code. You can also connect in that way. There's actually a slide that we'll be jumping to that has a QR code and shows this as well. On the bottom of each of our slides, you're going to see some links down there. There's a heart on the one that I have showing right now, as well as a little, dialogue bubbles you see down there. And that's places where you can kind of interact with the slides. Here we have a heart one, right? But really no specific meaning on this slide. But the other one is a place where you can ask questions. So we can also watch the Zoom chat as well as watch for, conversation inside the Menti thing as well. On a few of them, maybe we'll use them to make sure everybody understands the question and kind of, use a thumbs up, thumbs down or whatever else. Betsy may guide us a little bit as she has questions, or maybe I'll throw out some thoughts too as well on those. So, kind of with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Betsy and let her kind of get us started, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth. This really is intended to be very, interactive with everybody throughout the whole way through.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So as Brian has said, we'll be using Mentimeter to take a pulse of the community. Today, our focus is on recruiting and retaining the right people, and RCDs is really difficult to do. And with the recent problems with people facing hiring people, we thought it would be interesting to take the perspective of what do we think the minimum entry requirements should be, and we want to focus that completely on system-facing people. Now, there might be instances where you think about research-facing overlaps with system-facing, but we're really going to try to drill into that conversation today. So what skills are really required for early career people? And we're going to also hit on what skills are hardest to find in candidates, and especially in developing new hires. Then we'll hit on what size of your team is. And we're going to do that because we want to drill into, do people wear multiple hats? And we'll get into a little bit of that. And then what additional or lacking skills should a team, or skills do we need to focus on for new members? If you want to, next slide, maybe. Okay, so what we want to do, what's the outcome of today, is we're going to collect the information and we're going to publish our findings in the CARC system facing, and then follow up on future system facing topics. We really want this to be an engaging, interactive session, and we want to make sure that we're keeping this conversation open. So we'll be looking for other opportunities to increase the sample size, so we make sure that what we're identifying is actually the sample of the community and not just a small subset. We'll also try to look for other opportunities to produce the outcomes of this. And then we want to make sure that you understand that we're not trying to replace other things that are going on in the community, and especially in terms of like other communities that are also furthering this work. So we want to recognize that this work is being done by many people in the community, and we just really want to enhance that, not replace that. So finally, my shout out is, if you're looking to get involved in this effort, we'd love to have you. You can contact our system facing email address, and we'll respond to that. And we don't know if we get enough people. This might become a working group. This might be a special interest group. We just want to kind of take a feel today and see how things go. So we're going to get spin up. On the next slide, you'll see we have the Mentimeter. If you're not already joined, please join now, because we'll start with our questions here shortly. So you can go to www.menti and enter that code. You can also use the QR code and then Brian did drop the link into the chat window. Do we have anyone that has not been able to successfully connect with Mentimeter? You can give us a thumbs up, or I think, like we said, we have a little icon on this page to help, or you can drop in the chat if you're having problems. Yeah, so if you click on the Mentimeter, as Brian has put at the top, anyone not connected? Sounds good. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started with our first question. Okay, so what the next thing we're going to do is it's going to be an exercise with the word cloud. We'd like for you to answer at least maybe 3 questions here, or at least provide 3 answers. And so what the next question, so Brian, if we can get to the next one, what are the skills? What skills are required for an early career RCD systems professional? You should see a prompt now that would ask you at least 10 questions, but you can, there we go. We see some people popping in. Linux, of course. Curiosity, I love that one. Actually, that's a really good one. Research seems like a good one. I really am intrigued by the curiosity one. That is a really good one. Helpful attitude. Yes, absolutely.
And just to kind of give you a help on the scope of what we're looking for here is, feel free to put as many of these in. You can fill it out more than once, right? The more we get, the more we'll discover overlaps in people's, perspectives, and you'll see that reflected here by how it enlarges and highlights specific words, right? But I think we're looking here is specifically these skills that we want an early career person to show up with, right? This is what we would want to kind of be hunting for in that, what we would put in our job posting, what we're hoping they're going to put on their resume, their application. Not necessarily what we want them to develop or grow into when we're talking about this early career starting point. What is square one? That's what we're trying to discover from everybody's perspective.
And it looks like Linux makes sense. Linux. This is really fascinating. Patience. I like that one. Helpful attitude. Enthusiastic. Yes. These are great, especially as a hiring person. It's really interesting to see what, as the specialist on this call, what you think is important. One of our follow-up questions, future, Brian, might be, do you and your organization help vet resumes when they come in? And how do you, what specific things do you look for? I think that's at the heart of what we're trying to get at. But these are great answers. Okay. Getting close. Do we want to give it another?
Yeah, let's give it just a little bit more. I think we still have some coming in. Again, you can fill out the form more than once individually. There's not a limit on that.
And if I'm understanding, and anyone wants to unmute, when we're thinking about actual hard skills, it looks like Linux and scripting are obviously taking the lead. Looks like we have networking. I like the hardware one. I find it interesting that most of you are really thinking about this as a soft skill question, not so much a hard skill, which I think is amazing. Research, understanding, programming.
Well, you can teach the hard skills. Teaching soft skills is a lot more difficult.
I don't know who said that, but do you, as a follow-up, do you feel like that attitude has changed over the last few years, or do you feel like that's always been, when you're looking at resumes, the requirements?
I think that's always been the case.
Okay.
I mean, hard skills are great. Don't underplay them, but the soft skills, like I said, if you don't have those, you're pretty much up the creek.
So there's
Yeah.
a question in the Mentimeters question answer about where's the word cloud. So the word cloud is right now being shown on the screen that we're sharing from Zoom. And this, again, we will give a static, link to the end results as well as kind of the end product at the end, but you should be able to follow along and see the product that's being created if you've got maybe a tab, watching, or you can alt tab between the Zoom presentation and the Mentimeters, input. Does that answer your question?
Basic Unix familiarity. I like that one.
All right, why don't we give it maybe another 15, 20 seconds, and then we'll wrap this question up.
Yep. Seems like these are really great. Version control, I like that one. I really find the patience and communication that just makes me feel really good, because I think we tend to not, we don't allow that sometimes in early career people. And it's a really great reminder.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the voting on this one.
Great.
Now, if anybody was in the middle of typing, I can unclose it real fast if you just needed a second more to click yours. Feel free to, mention that. If not, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide if you're ready, Betsy.
Yep, I'm ready. Okay, so the next question we had is, now that we've talked about what skills are required, let's drill down into what are the hardest skills or the hardest things to find in candidates or develop with new hires. So if we want to open up the next polling, Brian, so here we are. What skills do you think are the hardest to find in a candidate or to develop in new hires? And I think this will be another fascinating question that I think Brian and I think we have a common theme, but it'll be interesting to see. Yes, I was hoping to see networking, because a personal level for me, it seems like networking is one of the hardest things to understand as a new early career person. Debugging storage, yes, yes. And I guess with cloud now being on the horizon, do we find that if you need to hire that skill, what does that really look like? I still like to see that this people skills is one of those things that we should never underestimate. Troubleshooting, of course. Optimization. So we said Linux skills was required. Do you think that those are also the hardest to develop, those advanced Linux skills? Because I did see Linux popping in here as well. Documentation. That's a good one. Working with others, time management, very good. And those that had offered up the networking one, if you want to unmute or put in chat, one thing I would like to understand is, like, if you feel that that is one of the hardest, how do you go about teaching networking? Do you have a tip or a trick you could share with the community?
Old hardware can be great for learning networking. Put something behind a little firewall and some enterprise grade hardware, and teach them how to use the command line.
Mm-hmm.
And build something small.
That's really great feedback. And then again, as we're thinking about this from an assessment standpoint, are there ways that you're assessing early career folks in the skills that they have coming in, and then the ones that they need to learn? Do you have a way that you're doing that type of assessment that you'd be willing to share with all of us?
Well, sort of back to what I just mentioned, in the past, I've had candidates diagram out their home network. So that shows them the ability to diagram the home network and to have a general understanding about, the tubes and the way things work from a technology perspective. And you get a great insight into, do they even have an inkling about the basics of networking and how computers interact?
Very good. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share on this one?
I kind of like trying to get people to understand layer 2 of networking. I think understanding that layer is important. So doing just like TCP dumps, looking at ARP, that's typically what I try to get people to do, to try to understand, at least for IP and Ethernet, how this works. And once you kind of get your head around that, it becomes a little easier to understand the fancier networks.
Thank you, Jeanette. That's really good feedback.
I like
Okay,
how
are we?
UEFI is tiny, hiding right there in the middle right now. That one speaks to me right now for stuff we have going on here. So I like seeing it there. Whoever added that in, thanks.
So one other thing, I don't know, as we're winding down on this question, one other question I have as we see these things pop in your organization, do you have a mentoring program where you're helping early career people? And if you do, if you wanted to share what that looks like for the community, I think that's also another really good thing we could all learn from.
Let's give it 20 seconds more and I'll close voting.
Okay. I like the time management. I think that is definitely, if you're not good at time management, that's one of the hardest things to learn and to get good at. Okay, as voting has closed, do we have any additional people wanted to add anything, or can we move on? It looks like we have do we have a question there?
The question is one we tried to answer earlier about
Okay.
where the results are being shown.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like we had at least 22 people voted on that one. Great. Okay, so next up, as we think about those skills that we're trying to develop, we really thought that depending on the size of your team and the role you play in your organization, like we mentioned, you might be purely a system-facing person, or you might be someone that has to wear multiple hats. So we're going to dig in just a little bit more with this. We're going to have 2 exercises that address the size of the institution and or team, and then how are you specializing, or what are you looking at from the perspective of recruiting? So Brian, if we could start with the first question. In our next question, we're going to ask you which best represents your organization from an RCD team model. Now we're just saying pick the one that best matches your organization, because we could all say long term we all wear many hats. So let's go ahead and see if we can open up this poll. So which best represents your organization model? When you're recruiting, in particular, people that wear many hats, individuals specialize in specific roles, or we share our team with other IT departments. And I'll tell a quick story here. At Purdue, I think over time that has changed. When I originally became the manager in our organization, we had to really wear many hats because we just didn't have enough people on the team to cover all of the things we needed to do. But as our team has grown, some of the people on my team have specialized in specific things like storage. But we also, as Brian and I were talking about, we do also know that out there are teams that have to share their resources with other IT departments. And I see we have at least one of those on the call. I don't know if you want to unmute and kind of tell us what that structure looks like, and do you find issues with that?
And I'd say what we're really curious on is how does it complicate the recruitment process, right?
Sorry, I was getting my mic working here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that's me. I guess I'm the one vote with Oregon State University, and we are sort of in the midst of a IT reorg. And one of the things we're trying out is creating groups to tackle specific problems, and those groups are leveraging skill sets from the various IT departments across campus. So that's what I was referring there.
Okay. So one of the things Betsy and I were curious on as we were kind of posing these questions is when you're looking at least these three categories, even though they're fairly still general, and your institutions individually, you might find they don't perfectly match, right? I'm just going to pick on the wear many hats. I find that has challenged us here in our recruitment efforts when you're trying to write up a job description that's asking for half orange and half apple, because the probability of finding somebody out there that represents that seems harder. And then you're trying to pick, well, which one of those two personalities matters most and which one is easier to train. And you're starting to play this compromise game of well, if I have to pick, then what should I pick, first? And there's challenges also kind of with the specialization too, right? Because sometimes specialists are hard to find, in that particular, deep rabbit hole, if it's too detailed. So it's just kind of opening this kind of question about how what models are we in? And then that really leads up to this next question.
Yep. Are we closing this one?
I think we probably can.
Okay.
Oh, we have Tim threw something in the Zoom chat. It says, what's the minimum size to get out of that situation? Tim, do you mind explaining that just a little bit better?
Well, if you have a RCD team of one, I was a center director with 0 direct reports, which means I did absolutely everything. Obviously you cannot have specialization at that size. Some of these big centers, yeah, they can have storage teams where somebody is just responsible for or you have a team working on Luster and a team working on Ceph and this, that, and the other. What is the kind of the minimal size of a center where you can get away from these I'm doing absolutely everything type situations?
That's a good question.
It was more meant to as a future broader question.
Yeah. As you were posting that, I was thinking that's a really great question, because I would think about it in terms of what products or services does the organization support, and that actually has to probably come into play here as well. I think, Brian, we should definitely drill into how do we further investigate this.
Yep, I'm just quickly capturing that into the doc.
I recently changed institutions, and I got to thinking about, if I were to start again, what would be my minimum size? And, if you're joining a team with whatever, below a certain size, I don't think I would even try, because I think it would be impossible. Now, I don't know what that number is. I haven't thought about it, but I think in order to be successful, there almost needs to be a number or a rough idea.
And Brian, were you on the call yesterday? Because Mark post, this question ties very closely to yesterday's CART call presentation by Jonathan.
I was not on the call yesterday to know what that
Okay,
question was.
yeah. And Mark, thank you for posting that. Like I did mention, we are trying to support, he strongly advocated specialization. That's interesting. I guess I would say, I guess I shouldn't speak for my team, but I would think my team would be bored if they were completely specialized. But that's, again, maybe that's another question we should be posting as a follow-up for this, Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you for this participation. We'll move on. Now that we've asked you what best represents your organization model, let's take a look at the next question we're going to ask. So, and Tim, I think you hit on this very clearly. You know, how does this model affect your organization ability to recruit early professionals? You know, what are those key things that have been problematic for you? So if we want to open up that next poll, because I like how Mark posts that, you know, they the presentation yesterday strongly advocates for specialization. I can tell you from my perspective, trying to recruit a system specialist that focuses just on storage has been extremely challenging in terms of recruiting in the job description. So I guess I'll do a shout out if anyone's looking to specialize in storage, please come to Purdue. I'm interested in hearing from the folks that said wearing many hats. So do you feel like when we're thinking about the recruitment piece, is it hard to isolate what those minimum viable skills that you need when you're trying to cover, as Tim pointed out, like maybe you're doing research facing in this position, you have to do a bit of research facing, you have to do a bit of system facing, you have to do a bit of data facing. How do you, if you have some tips and tricks on how you're writing those job descriptions or how you're focusing on making that job sound encouraging or inviting. If anyone has any suggestions on how you do that today, please unmute, because I think this again would be a really interesting topic to see how that has helped you or hindered you. I like the being able to work on multiple projects. That's a good one. Yeah, the many hats, I like that. It's hard to write an effective job description.
You know, I just say that, you know, verbally that I have the bias to liking the idea of both the specialization and the many hats, right? I like the specialization because I think it allows somebody to excel in an area. But at the same token, you almost want them to have gone through an earlier phase of many hats, whether it was all at once or in sequence, doesn't really matter to me, because you always seem to want to develop a broad understanding of the full service set that you're providing. And so if you just bring somebody in to just do this, and that's the only thing they ever do, sometimes it's their understanding of your environment stays so narrow that I think that's limiting. And just as a disclaimer, Betsy and I are trying this way that it's doing the questions, how it's capturing everybody's answers. So this scrolling thing on the left that's happening, at least on my screen, I think we're learning whether this was an effective way to capture it. So bear with us a little bit.
Yep. I noticed that too, but I'm like, okay. I really like though, someone writes that we recruit early career professionals, they skill up and move on to higher paying jobs. Retention is tough. I really like that one because I feel in the last couple of years, what I have personally found is that exact problem. We recruit the early career, we give them the skills that, you know, make them that next level working into that. And then they, in my situation, we're able to make a lot more money coming in. Now Purdue has since then has self-corrected some of that. But do we find that there are other things other than pay that you find that the early career people leave once they skill up? Is it more, are there other things that cause that those folks to leave the organization?
I'll chip in one. It's that people get frustrated with the shenanigans at management levels and or the lack of opportunity for advancement by any method other than assassination, which is unfortunately the case in some areas.
Thank you. So I like the, I'm sorry, did someone unmute?
Yeah, I was going to say, to backtrack to the obstacles to hiring, sometimes the biggest obstacle to overcome can be, or to use the term loosely, corporate HR. Like they throw a boilerplate in and somebody reads it and it starts off with saying, must be completely fluent and a wizard in Linux and Windows and, you know, all this other stuff that's part of some generic boilerplate. And sometimes that scares off very qualified people for what you want because of all the extra fluff that gets put into the job description as posted.
The other thing that we see is that the only way to really get a raise is to move jobs. And I see that not just in my university, but a lot of other places. You know, you kind of get stuck in your one spot, and it's like, well, your path up is to move somewhere else because that's the only way you're going to get, you know, compensated for what you know.
Exactly, and often that move is out of the technical realm into management, and some people, and I'm one of them, don't want to make that move. So we either put up with the low salary or we go somewhere where the technical skill has a bigger paycheck.
There's some nice comments going on in the Zoom chat as well, if you're following along there. Jeanette was making a comment there at the end, good working environment, higher value than, you know, pay being second. I agree with that.
Sorry about that. My internet was not happy. All right, how we doing? Have we gotten, most people have voted? Anyone left?
Okay, I will go ahead and close this one up. If you do want to add something to this one, feel free to poke me or let me know. I can open it back up.
Yeah, so we're headed into the last question. And again, I think at the end of the conversation today, we're going to unmute and let people just generally give us feedback on the topic and then where we want to head next. So heading into the last question, what additional lacking or emerging skills should new team members focus on developing next? So now we're talking about they're in their early career, they've just started, and we know that they have Linux because we've hired them. But what are those next set of skills, do you think, or as new technology starts to come out, what are those skills that we need to train people up on that we haven't had to train up on? Containers, Kubernetes, I expected to see some of that. I don't know, Brian, did you want to add to this?
You know, so this is kind of that dividing line, right? When you're writing that job description based on our first question, right? Where our first question was trying to capture those things of we really want them to have when they come in day one, right? This is now that list that steps beyond what we wanted them to have. In fact, maybe it's the reality that we know that we probably would never get these things, even though we wished somehow we could. So this is kind of that. Then we got them in the door. Now we're immediately going to try to get them to learn these things. And this is something either we're going to in-house train or somewhere in the community, there's going to be a resource that they can go and learn from, you know, documentation, conference, et cetera, et cetera. where are we then immediately pointing to a new hire to then develop into the full-fledged employee that we need them to be?
Monitoring. So the monitoring one, is that like, are you thinking, is that like Sensu? Is that like teaching how to do monitoring? I like that one. GPUs. Okay. Cloud computing, the SPAC, that's a good one. And I guess if someone wants to unmute and give us more about emerging skills, as you see new technologies coming out, are there emerging skills that you're seeing that people even mid-career, late career, that we see problematic, that we need to start training people up on, that we just haven't seen in the past? Hybrid computing. I'm interested in understanding more about that as well. Parallel cluster storage, that's a good one. Wow. Looks like configuration management is, we have that in a few ways. That seems like a really good one. So Brian, as we're wrapping this question up, I would like to hear from the community. Are there questions we should have asked that we didn't ask today to try to vet some of these ideas? And again, we started this conversation about saying recruiting and retaining is really hard for early career people, but we're also thinking about this from an assessment standpoint. Again, as we're assessing people as they come into the organization, and we want to make sure we're mentoring these early career folks to get to the next level in their position and want to stay in the organization. Are there questions you think we should be thinking about that we didn't ask today? Oh, come on, we couldn't have done that great.
And really, to answer this, unmute, type in Zoom chat, go ahead and throw it in the Mentimeters Q&A. We don't really have a slide specifically for that one, right? To have you do another fill in the blank type thing.
I would just jump in. Take these same questions, but ask them in the context of an organization that's very high on distributed IT support. So our university has a very strong, it's a two-person research computing team in central IT, but there's a lot of people in individual departments where they can afford to hire people doing their own research computing support. And some of those are students and stuff like that. So a lot of these questions are similar, particularly when we're working with those students who aren't necessarily part of central IT, but are part of our research computing support paradigm.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, there was there was that workshop in 2017 that tried to address this issue. Betsy, you know, I've mentioned this to you before. I know I've talked to people, and I did a summary of that for SysPros, and there's a link to that summary if you want to read it. And I think some of the things that our profession lacks is like standardized job descriptions, which is kind of what we played around the edges at here, right? And not having like a professional path, it just makes, you know, it's just a big mismatch, right? And if our field could somehow come up with, you know, what a junior admin is and what we expect there. And again, it sounds like the soft skills are what we're really after, and the, you know, those kinds of things. And then, but once you get past junior, there are certain skills that you have to have. So, you know, getting those, and then further on from that, like maybe an architect position or something like that. So having a path defined would be really good too for just recruiting people. It makes it a profession. Right now, it's just a big mismatch of understand a bunch of technical stuff, all the technical stuff, right? So that was a really good workshop, and I highly recommend the paper that we did send to the NSF on it. But the summary is pretty good too.
Right. So
if I do say so myself.
Kyle's sharing a link here too that kind of fits in with what I was going to say. There actually is quite a bit going on, and Betsy was hinting this at the beginning. There's a lot of active things going on in the community right now, trying to look at workforce development and career arcs, and maybe trying to be, you know, careful. I think a lot of what Betsy and I have been looking at, you know, to try to push this topic forward to this group was to be sensible in how ambitious we were trying to be, and collaborative in light of all these other efforts. Some of the other efforts seem to be either very generically RCD, right, which could be more than just the systems type role. It could be facilitator, it could be all sorts of things. And specifically, as you're talking about, you know, getting things more defined, you know, in a, you know, professionalization, I think that's one of the very real areas that needs to be done. I think right now our biggest ambition is to make sure there's some very clearly designed or gathered facts. And if your summary has additional from that previous workshop, gathering more of these things together to make sure that at least the systems voice for these are the basic skill sets somebody starting needs to have. As these other efforts go, either we're joining in and trying to help them along, or we're looking to see if our particular corner of the conversation is just not getting the same attention as others. Do we need to rally our forces and try to, you know, get things happening alongside some of these other efforts? I don't know. I think there's a lot of hope to see if something can be done without trying to bite off more than we can chew.
Yeah, we've talked about this for so long, Brian, right? This kind of standardization of what are we? You know, it just doesn't seem like there's a description. And it seems like by now we should have come up with something that you could then use as to hire junior admins, right? To hire senior admins. Yeah, so I'm glad to know that there are other efforts still working on this, and that you're involved in it. That's great.
And Jeanette, I really like your idea on standardizing job descriptions. I think that might be an effort that if we have additional people that want to join this topic as a special interest group or working group, we're really open to ideas. But one of the artifacts we could start to work on is, what does a generalized job description look like? It seems from slide 1, the very first activity exercise we did, that the real requirement we're talking about is Linux. And so can we write a job description that's very basic, that's inviting, that makes people want to be attracted to this community, just by saying Linux is one of those skills that, you know, maybe the only skills required. So I really like where we're going here. Yeah.
That was the biggest thing identified in I think in that NSF report that we did, was that the laundry list for a job description, a job posting, it is not going to work. That's the scariest thing in the world, and you're never going to get anybody to apply. And it's not the right way. You really don't need everybody to have all those skills. You really do need to take a think about what's the underlying thing underneath all of those skills that you really want them to have so they could learn those things. And so that was in the NSF report, right? That was in my summary. We're all around it right here now too. So I think there is something that we could come up with for a junior level admin position that is more soft skilled, team oriented, right? That kind of stuff, rather than, you must have blah,
Yeah, and I think someone posted, Jeanette, are you willing to share the link? Because I think the link you sent goes to the digital library, and if you don't have access to the ACM digital library, you can't get the report.
Yeah.
So I think that would be awesome if you would be willing to share that with the community. I feel like that could be part of our artifacts that help us support the next phase of what we want to do.
Yeah, let me find one real quick. I'll put it in the notes. Okay, how's that sound?
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great idea.
All right.
Okay. And then
So
Tim also, right? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm going to go ahead and close up this particular slide that we've been on, because I think we've got enough time on that done.
Yep. And then Tim also writes that there is the CI job family matrix, which Brian and I are aware of, that you can find on the CARC. And the links also here. And I think, Brian, as we're wrapping up, some of the things we might take from today's, we'll take the chat and we'll make sure that the notes are updated with some of these links. And again, we would like to use this as artifacts and how we move forward. And so if we want to take just a few minutes, we have about 5 minutes where do we have ideas? Are people interested in moving forward? I think if moving forward with the topic, do we have topics, ideas the things we should be hitting next? If people want to unmute or put in the chat, either chat, that's fine with us.
Right. So to be specific, we're talking about here, if we do, so right now we're looking at October is an opportunity to come back to this topic. Where should we take this topic from the way we took it today, where we were trying to talk about this starting point of hiring a new person, an early access early career person. What should be the next part of the conversation about that person? And as Betsy has kind of talked about, and we've hinted through the conversation, once you have somebody in the door and you've started working on training them on these skill sets you didn't get them in with, what is the next part of the conversation? And part of that might be how you're looking at them develop those skills, how you're measuring their progress on that, how you're seeing them able to advance their career within your kind of questions around how do we have a visit as a group so that we can take a measurement to try to capture valuable insights into these next stages of a individual's career's progression that help us understand what's going on out there. So that's the types of things I think we really want to try to understand. What should we discuss next time that accomplishes that, that you think would be valuable?
And as we're doing that, we can wrap up go to the next slide. For universities, is annoying trying to hire students with the idea to grow them into full-time employees. Yes, I see the aversion to students as they graduate and leaving as passionate. I think on the call today, I probably have 2 or 3 of my teammates that started out as students at Purdue and have become, have stayed as early career systems folks. We have lost people once they've actually have transpired from that very early career. We've talked about this already. and then they get those skills. We have actually seen quite a few people leave our organization as well for more money. Okay, so we are at about time. Any final thoughts from the community or Brian that we wrapping today up?
Nope, just really appreciate everybody's patience in trying out kind of this different than usual approach to trying to have an interactive session. We'd actually love to also hear feedback on how you thought this went. You know, here on this last little slide, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down, you know, a heart. We honestly really don't know what the cat was for. You know, feel free to give it a thumbs up if you liked how the interactiveness of today's went. Feel free to give it a thumbs down if it was not an effective way to try to interact on these types of topics. Feel free to just send Betsy and I a note as well if you'd like. Yeah, I see cats number one.
Yeah, someone needs to explain the cat thing to me. I like the cat flying.
But
Careful,
again,
dogs will demand equal time.
we really appreciate everybody's participation.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks everyone and have a good day.
Yep, we can wrap up here.
The cats are winning.